a violation of federal criminal law that could potentially affect the federal award. Additionally, it is proposed to clarify that Part 200 supersedes any previous OMB guidance on cost principles. So this would include any of those previous circulars. Also, the detailed list of cost principles is proposed to be removed. It has also been proposed that recipients do not need prior approval of individual subrecipients in all circumstances. Prior approval is only needed when making subawards of programmatic activities not proposed by the recipient in the award application. 10 items have been proposed to be removed from the prior approval requirements. This is to reduce federal agency and recipient burden. These items include no longer requiring prior approval for items such as real property, direct costs, fluctuations in exchange rates, civic and/or community memberships, and entertainment costs, as well as several other various costs. There are several modifications and expansions to the definitions. Modifications to the definitions of definition of question costs to be more explanatory and expand on the definition to make it easier to understand. Additionally, the proposal includes adding the definition of encumbrance as it relates to property and equipment to 3 different sections. Also, the definition of unused supplies and advisory council and/or committee are proposed to be added to subpart E, cost principles. There's also several changes to the threshold amounts throughout the guidance, and this is probably what impacts the agencies the most. These include an increase in the single audit threshold from $750,000 to $1 million. So subrecipients will not be subject to the single audit unless they receive $1 million or more in federal funds for the year. The threshold amount for equipment has also been proposed to increase from $5,000 to $10,000. It is also proposed to adjust the exclusion threshold of subawards from $25,000 to $50,000 under modified total direct costs. So instead of $25,000 of each subaward being included, $50,000 from each subaward can be included in your calculation of modified total direct costs. Also, the simplified acquisition threshold, which is now $250,000 for fixed amount subawards, is proposed to be removed to allow for increased flexibility in program and budget decision making. Additionally, indirect costs. There's been several changes proposed that relate to indirect cost rates. So most of these pertain to section 200.414. And these include an increase to the de minimis indirect cost rate percentage from 10% to 15%. So this will be beneficial to those entities who do not currently have a federally approved indirect cost rate so that they can recover more of their indirect costs. The removal of the existing requirement for all indirect cost rates to be publicly available on a government-wide website. So it used to be where it was required that if you had a federally approved indirect cost rate for it to be publicly available on a government-wide website, but that is proposed to change to not be a requirement anymore. Clarification that all pass-through entities must accept all federally negotiated indirect cost rates for subrecipients. This has been an issue in the past where pass-through entities were not wanting to honor a previously approved indirect cost rate. So this will just make it more clear that they do need to honor that rate. There are certain circumstances where another rate can be established, but it has to be agreed upon by both parties, and the subrecipient cannot be coerced into accepting a lower rate. There's also one proposal for Appendix 7 related to indirect costs. So it is proposed that federal agencies must accept indirect cost proposals developed by state or local departments or agencies receiving less than $35 million during the fiscal year. Okay, now we're going to talk about some updates to fixed amount subawards. And this may not be too common with state agencies, but there could be some state agencies that do receive these type of awards. So we're going to go over this as well. The proposed updates to section 200.201 relating to fixed amount subawards include clarification that recipients are entitled to any unexpended funds under a fixed amount award if the required activities were completed in accordance with the terms and conditions of the award. So as long as the recipient of the fixed amount award did what was required, any unexpended funds would not need to be returned. Other proposed updates to section 200.201 include clarification of record retention and post-award certification requirements, considering the requirement of additional pre-award certifications to address the potential risk of fraud, and identifying certain prior approval requirements that specifically relate to fixed amount awards. Additionally, proposed updates to section 200.333 include removing the simplified acquisition threshold cap for fixed amount awards that is currently in place. This was also mentioned previously when we talked about thresholds before. Another proposed section to be changed are updates relating to fringe benefits and pension costs. So these include revisions to require recipients and subrecipients to allocate payments for unused leave as general administrative expenses or include them in a fringe benefit rate with agency approval. Clarification that subrecipients may not charge unfunded pension and post-retirement health benefits to an award in a manner that is not consistent with the allocation principles of Subpart E. And clarifying guidance proposed on pension plan costs and post-retirement health plans. A concern that NASAC had about this proposed update is that it appears to limit pension and other post-employment benefit costs charged directly to the federal grants to the normal cost and does not account for any unfunded accrued liability. NASAC has sent a comment related to this, along with several other comments to the OMB about this. Okay, the last category we're going to talk about regarding updates to the 2 CFR 200 are the proposed updates to the Notice of Funding Opportunity, also known as the NOFO. This is to simplify and clarify the grant solicitation and application process between the federal agencies and the recipients of federal funds. It is proposed to improve the quality and accessibility of funding opportunities for federal agencies passing through funds to non-federal entities. These proposed revisions include follow plain language principles, group similar items together to streamline content, align sections more closely to the application process, include basic information such as funding opportunity title, assistance listing number, key dates, and other funding details. So this is so applicants can more easily make decisions about whether or not they want to apply for the funding. Also, it is to clearly define what must be included in the Notice of Funding Opportunity versus what is at the agency's discretion. It is also designed to provide flexibility to agencies while also providing applicants with a consistent way to find information. And now I'm going to hand it over to Gayla, who's going to talk about other proposed revisions under consideration, as well as some highlights and resources for the proposed updates. She's also going to briefly talk about our upcoming webinar on the Cash Management Improvement Act.
Good morning. Jill has been talking about concentrating on the uniform guidance in Title II, Part 200. There's also updates in general to Title II. So these are some of the ones in Title II. Title II is titled Grants and Agreements currently, and one of the proposed changes is to change it to federal assistance to clarify or emphasize that it's not just about grants and cooperative agreements. You know, there's loan guarantees, there's all kind of federal assistance. So that's mainly a clarification to change it to federal assistance. And also in Title II, there's a Part 25 that's currently called Universal Identifier and System for Award Management. Well, this is just another title change. They're going to change it to Unique Entity Identifier and System for Award Management. You've all heard a lot about the UEI recently in the past year that replaced the DUNS number in System for Award Management. So basically, this is just making the titles, aligning them to current practices. So on the, because 25.100 already states that the UEI is the universal identifier. Speaking of the UEI, the proposal clarifies the subrecipients will be required to obtain a UEI. However, that this does not apply to subrecipients of subrecipients or to contractors, which I know the contractor part has been a question some agencies have had. Also on part 25, it's going to clarify or state that recipients of loan guarantees from a federal agency are required to obtain a UEI. Next slide, please. So this slide has a lot of clarifications and revisions to what they call properly align, or to make sure that everything agrees with statutes, and to all use the same wording. So we start out with Part 170, which is about reporting subaward and executive compensation. Basically, on this, they revised guidance to properly align it with statutes. The same with Part 175, award term for trafficking in persons. Basically, the same, revised the guidance to align it with statutes that have been amended. Part 180, which hopefully you're all familiar about, that's one of the debarment and suspension parts. And on that, they've clarified information such as the administrative actions that the federal government can take instead of federal debarment. There's also the parts 182 and 183 that have what they call limited plain language revisions, which include like inserting the word federal on agency in front of agencies to clarify that they're talking about federal agencies and not state agencies or a different type of agency. So that is mostly, yeah, clarifications and plain language revisions. Next slide, please. Here we have some more revisions that are under consideration, such as establishing specific audit requirements for for-profit entities. Right now in subpart F, you have a lot about states and nonprofits, but they're going to, and I'm sorry, I didn't clarify that these are revisions under consideration for the future, not ones that are in the proposal right now. So they're thinking of adding requirements for the for-profits. And about providing additional guidance concerning the relationship of aspects of guidance to loan guarantees. This next one's a good about establishing mechanisms that would automatically adjust thresholds, like, you know, you have thresholds on equipment when you capitalize equipment. So the various thresholds they're thinking of, can they make them so they automatically adjust? They're reviewing if they should remove more additional prior approval requirements. On indirect costs, they're continuing to look at indirect cost topics, like negotiating indirect costs, and how to address those in the future. And related to audits, again, they're looking to expand the guidance in subpart F to have more specific requirements about the scope of an audit, adding more contextual information for agencies. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, there's a summary of a lot of things that Jill had talked about with the uniform guidance. There's we have increases to thresholds and caps. like Jill mentioned, an increase in the single audit threshold to from 750,000 to 1 million. So what that means, if an agency, like a nonprofit agency, has $800,000 of total money from federal assistance, they wouldn't have to have a single audit because the threshold is going to go up to 1 million. The equipment thresholds, when do you capitalize equipment? I remember in a lot of jobs on the account codes, you have to know, is this equipment or is it supplies? And when do you capitalize it? So that threshold's going up to 10,000. There's also increases regarding the indirect cost rates, so that entities that don't have a federal negotiated indirect cost rate can elect to charge the de minimis rate, which is going up from 10 to 15%. And also the amount of each subaward that can be included in a modified total direct cost calculation is increasing to 50,000 from 25. They also are proposing to remove in part 200.407, remove 10 items from prior written approval requirements in order to reduce federal and recipient burden. For fixed award subawards, they're proposing to remove the simplified acquisition cap. And also, like Jill had mentioned, there's going to be limits and clarifications to pension costs that can be charged directly to federal grants. Okay, next, please. These are resources if you'd like further information. We have the Federal Register publication. There's a red line document there where you can see what's been crossed off in the proposal. We have a Word document that was sent out that has proposed changes by subpart and part. So you can go like subpart 100, what are the proposed, or subpart A, yeah, I'm forgetting my subparts and parts now, but through all the CFR, the subparts and part 200.100, and you can go through all of that in order to see the changes, or at least the highlights of those changes. There was a webinar that Attain Partners did. They called it Extreme Makeover. We have that available. There's two of those. They did a PowerPoint presentation, and then they also had a question and answer. So we have those recordings available for you. Next slide, please. CMIA, which I could probably talk for a long time on, but this is just a preview of a webinar we're going to do probably in February or March. As many of you know, we've been working on the CMA. We're completing the 2023 CMIA annual report. Many of you have heard from me about your cash balances and just questions about them. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the CMIA, it's in 31 CFR Part 205. We're only supposed to have enough cash to get us through right now. I mean, you know, the immediate time. So CMI talks about that. It goes in the CFR, there's parts A and B. The subpart A talks about the Treasury State Agreement, and in that we have to list all the ALNs, or what we used to call CFDAs, that are involved or that are part of the Treasury State Agreement. It also has a subpart B about programs that are not included in, with the rules for programs that are not included in the TSA. And we'll go, if you're not familiar with all that, we're going to discuss it more. But in the CMIA and in the Treasury State Agreement, we have to put the ALNs like 10559 and how we how we draw those down, how we fund them. Do we do it in advance? Do we do it reimbursement? Do we do it same day? There's funding techniques, and there's funding techniques that we'll be talking with some of you more about in the spring. Like I talked about, pre and post issuance or types of cash advance, the same day zero balance techniques, the reimbursement ones. And there's also others that we'll talk more about later. And about interest and the annual report, which I mentioned is what we're doing now. And in March and April, we have to do our draft of the Treasury State Agreement for 2025 already. So I know education and Medicaid and some of those programs are the big ones that always get into the Treasury State Agreement. We're going to contact some of you that are in the TSA in February, March, more about the funding techniques. And if any of you have questions, or if you've heard from me lately and you have questions, feel free to ask. And we'll be talking more about this in February or March. So now we're going to go back to Jill and see if you all have any questions. Thank you.
Yes, we're going to check to see if there's any questions in the chat. Do we have any, Gayla? And you can also unmute your line if you want to do that as well. And this can be questions on the updates or questions on the CMIA preview or any other questions that you have.
I don't see any in the chat, but feel free to put them in the chat or ask us. Give it a minute, but while we're waiting to see if anyone asks any questions, we do plan to send out an evaluation form after this webinar, and we will go ahead and attach those documents that we put in the invite, the slides from today and the summary document that Gayla and I put together on the proposed changes. We'll attach those to the email that we send out with the evaluation form, or with the link to the evaluation form, just in case you didn't get those in the invite. And then also, as Gayla mentioned, the CMIA will be our next webinar, and we're shooting for February, but it could be March, just depending on what we have going on during that time. So please look for an email and a webinar invite on that. Probably will go out in late January, early February. So please look for that. And that would be, the CMIA webinar would be more for anyone that's involved in that process and the financial aspect of things. And like Gayla said, we'll be reaching out to some of the agencies that are the big players in this, just to get some more information from them. So do we have anything, any questions? Anyone want to unmute your line? There are some questions that we probably need to look more into, but on the chat, there's does the change for equipment increasing to 10,000 affect depreciation of assets less than 10,000? And that might be something we will have to look into, because we do not know. I do not know the answer to that question. So that might be something. And it also could be, I think the comments were open till December 4th. I want to say that those comments will be published if they haven't been already, so that we can see what other states and nonprofit entities have commented or asked about. So that could be a question that's come up already. And if we find anything on it, if Gayla and I find anything on it, we can send something out on that. And the other one, I'm sorry, the other one in the chat is about the definition of the modified total direct cost. Since the limit's going to increase to 50,000, see. Will it automatically change if the UG changes? So the definition? Well, it says the definition of modified total direct cost is changing to increase the limit on subrecipient payments from 25 to 50,000. However, we also have defined in our F&A rate, they have that defined in their F&A rate agreement. I'm assuming they have the 25,000 in the rate agreement. Will this automatically change if the UG changes? So you're saying, will it change? Will your agreement change? That's a good, I mean, I would assume, but we'll look at that.
Well, I think it depends on, I think they're shooting for implementation for March of 2024. So nothing would be changed until then. And even then, I don't know if already established agreements, if anything would change in those. I would think definitely future agreements would change after March of 2024. But as far as already established, I'm not sure. So that's something that we'll have to look into as well.
My first guess would be after March of 2024, but yeah, I'm not positive.
After. Yeah, at least that's their goal, is to have the changes, any proposed. Now these are subject to change based on the comments submitted, so it could be that these may not all be included in those implemented changes in March of 2024. So any more questions? It looks like not. Also, if you guys think, if anyone thinks of anything after this webinar, please feel free to send us an email. You can send it to either Gayla or myself, or you can send it to the federal reporting inbox if you think of something that you didn't think of on the call or didn't want to ask on the call. Like I said before, we're going to send out an evaluation form. We'll put those 2 documents in there as well. And then we will also post the recording of this webinar as well as the slides to our team site, and it's the DACFA team site. So if you do not have access, please just shoot us an email and we will get you access to that site so you can view all of the webinars that we've had in the past. Should be on there, at least the slides and the recordings of the last few are on there. I'm assuming we don't have any more questions, so thank you for joining us today and taking the time out of your day to be here, and have a happy holiday season.